If you or someone you know struggles with addiction, stay right here for the Recovery Boys. Lewis Finch and Macon Moy discuss alcoholism, drug addiction, co-occurring disorders, and life in recovery. And now, here's Lewis and Macon.
So I'm Macon.
And I'm Lewis.
And we're the
Recovery Boys.
So we're...
we nailed that one.
Yeah.
It's been a while, though.
Yeah, we nailed them all. So listen, glad to be back on the Recovery Boys podcast. It's been a while since we've been in front of the camera, in front of the microphone with our man Terry. But we decided, after some conversation, that we want to start it back, and we're going to do it every Thursday. There's so much going on in our space and so many things going on in the world right now, and we'll talk a little bit about that today with the pandemic. And we are very lucky. We're coming to you from the beautiful facility here at Wellwind Intensive Outpatient in Raleigh. And this is where we'll be doing all of our work from going forward. Lewis, how you doing?
I'm doing well, considering. I mean, we've got, I know we'll get into it in more detail, but we've had quite the run over the last 2 years that I don't think any of us ever saw coming. And it's resulted in a lot of the things that have been going on in our space lately. I mean, you see a lot of mental health issues, a lot of addiction issues that have, although they were there, they weren't there in the volume that we're seeing them now. You know?
We'll talk about that. We actually have some new studies which we'll talk about. And as we were talking about in the office before we walked in here, the great thing about some of these studies is they're current. Because the pandemic is current, the studies are current, but there's no question it's changed the way we live. It's changed a lot of our habits. Unfortunately, it's also escalated a lot of our bad habits. For those of us that drink too much or use drugs in a way other than prescribed or buying street drugs, the opportunity to increase our use without anybody keeping up with it has really become a big deal. And you know, Lewis, well, I mean, here at Wellwind, we certainly have seen it. But we've never been busier. I think it's probably is a safe way to say it. But you know, the other thing is that we're just at the front of this thing. We're certainly not at the end of it. What will happen is the pandemic eventually they'll figure it out, or either we'll just become so numb to it that everybody will figure out. But the one thing that has increased is alcohol consumption and drug use. Those habits will stay. The pandemic will be gone, but the habits won't. And so the number of people that will be needing help in our space is just going to be astronomical. And, you know, one of the other things, and, well, you know, we'll talk about it as we get deeper into it, but I just wanted to catch everybody up. Lewis, why don't you kind of refresh our viewers,
our listeners, however you're receiving this, right?
Exactly. Why don't you tell a little bit how in the hell we ended up here?
That was an interesting way we ended up here. I've often marveled at that, but from a standpoint of our addictions, we both kind of come from it. It started out early with me, and I started drinking and doing drugs at a very young age, 13. Obviously, it wasn't as bad on the front end as it was on the back end when it ended 38 years later. And in between, you know, there were various incidents that would happen, none of which independently of themselves were signs that were really an issue, at least not with me. In the end, there were enough signs pointing me in the right direction where I needed to change my behaviors. And that's what Wellwind brings to the table, what most good treatment centers brings to the table. They train you how to change your behavior, even though the thoughts may be there that are driving the behaviors. And so at the end of my spree in April of 2007 was the last time I had anything to drink or use. A little over 14 years ago. And after I got sober, after I straightened up, my life kind of fell apart. And I had the tools in place at the time that I didn't go back out and do what I had been doing before. that's not always everybody's story either.
No, it's not.
So why don't you fill them in on your background too, mate? Because they fairly parallel each other.
Yeah. So, how did I end up in sitting here talking to Lewis Finch at Wellwyn? Sober for almost 10 years, 9 years and change. Gosh, I think I think about it a lot. But I was gifted. Unfortunately, I was gifted from an early age with some things that made, I guess if you look back on it, it made my alcoholism and drug addiction so much easier to develop and eventually take hold of me. I mean, one of the things we definitely know is there's 15% of us, whatever the number is, 15% of us have an addictive gene. I certainly have that. I didn't start messing with alcohol until I was 16 or 17 years old in high school.
But that was because you were an athlete, right?
Yeah, I was a good athlete,
Yeah.
and I was a good athlete. One of the things that we know about addiction and alcoholism is that there's always a co-occurring disorder, or it would be rare for somebody not to have some other issue besides the substance
So what
use.
as an example?
So for me, and it's taken me a long time, and I guess I'm probably still in discovery, but I craved attention. That was the one thing I got from athletics. I craved attention, but when I got it, it made me uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And so that anxiety that attention brought me, but I was destined to live a life where people paid attention to what I was doing because I was a good athlete. I was an excellent talker.
Communicator.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bullshit artist.
Yes. By the way, we can say that now.
Yeah,
We're not on radio.
Yeah. We
Shit.
could.
Hey, you happy now?
Yeah.
I feel better about it.
But one of the things that I discovered early in my life is that alcohol made the anxiety go away. Mm-hmm. And so I continued to live the kind of life where I'd always, bring attention to myself. Only alcohol and towards the end of my career of using opiates took that edge off of me. And then once you listen, and the way addiction and alcoholism and drug addiction works, once you get used to it, you crave more. I mean, I think we laugh about it. You think about this COVID pill that they talk about. If you take a COVID pill, I immediately thought, well, I'll take 2 of them. I mean, if one will make you better, then 2's got to make you a lot better. And that's the way we drank and the way I ate pills. So, but anyway, as most of us discover, it's not a long-term recipe for success. It's a long-term. It's a recipe for failure.
Well, but in a lot of cases, because it's so socially acceptable,
Yeah.
and because you can't. I mean, we talk about this all the time. You walk the closest retail store to us, which is literally within walking distance, sells alcohol.
Yep.
You walk down the street a little bit further, the next store sells alcohol.
Yeah. And
You can't get around it, and it's not their responsibility to control my behavior. It's my responsibility to control my behavior.
that's right.
So we have to learn to live in their world.
That's right. we do it, and the other thing is that drug use. I mean, finding drugs on the streets never been easier. I will say that the prescription pain pill party has become a lot. It's become a lot more complicated to fill your pockets up with Percocet or Vicodin or whatever, but you still can get it.
Very much so.
The caveat now, the thing that amazes me. I was talking to somebody. I was one of the people that we work with here, a younger person, and they were talking about the explosion of cocaine use again in
Mm-hmm.
bathrooms, bar bathrooms. And, I asked this particular person, I was like, you ever heard of fentanyl? You do know
Yes.
that there's a record amounts of fentanyl coming across the southern border, and they're mixing it with everything. And it makes the drug more powerful, but unfortunately, it doesn't take much to kill you.
Well, in the case of cocaine, there's really no reason you'd be mixing fentanyl with cocaine unless you were trying to kill somebody.
That's exactly right.
Because they do exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
One wakes you up, the other one puts you to sleep.
I know, it's crazy. So anyway, Listen, golf. I played golf. I bartended. I ran a rock and roll radio station for a number of years in Charlotte. Very successful. If we are going to keep up with success based on how much money we made, we both were very successful financially, which was a double-edged sword for us because it gave us resources to make bad decisions and to hide it or to cover it up, especially with my family. I've had conversations with my 3 kids about, my go-to was to buy them something. When I wasn't being a great father, I could buy my way out of it, and I thought that was awesome. But it, obviously it wasn't. Listen, long story short, I ended up in the hospital almost dead, out of money, living in a really nasty little apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where my drugs and alcohol took me. It landed me right there, and so.
But Megan, you're a smart guy. Why didn't you just change?
You can't change, Lewis. As much as
that was a rhetorical question.
But as much. Listen, how many times did I changed 1,000 times?
Yeah.
As we said to, I forget who we were speaking with yesterday. It's easy to stop drinking. It's hard to stay stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the same with all the habits and all the things that we ended up doing. Listen, everybody's different, but we all end up with the same problem, which is we have an addiction, a habit that takes the quality of life away from us. It robs us of our resources.
But at first it doesn't.
Well, just the opposite. Yeah. I would argue that alcohol and opiates gave me the courage to take risk, which turned out to be pretty good risk.
Right.
And so I profited significantly. Mm-hmm. And believe me, the way the brain, the addict brain, the alcoholic brain works, I put the two together and I was like, well, and like I say, if one drink before a meeting made me better, a bottle would make me incredibly good. And so, but that's a fallacy. That's the lie. You watch the media, they keep on, the big lie is what they keep on talking about. Well, the big lie in our business is that alcohol and drugs help you. They don't. It robs you of your life. It robs you. It destroys the people around you, and it destroys you.
Well, and let's, with a caveat too, for a certain group of people, like the 12 to 15% of the population, and we're not really sure what percent it actually is because it's such a clandestine disease, but somewhere around 12 or 15% of the population can't drink and or use even prescription drugs correctly unless they have more than their own wherewithal. So one of the things that people who come to us at Wellwyn have a hard time with is because most of our folks are high functioning adults.
Yep.
As were we.
Yep.
We were very successful in one part of our life. The problem is we think that somehow that translates over to the addiction side. Like, I can simply beat this thing.
Yeah.
And what we forget is we all got here the exact same way. We all came out of our mothers and we started learning. We learned, first of all, how to walk. First, we learned how to crawl. We learned how to roll over, then we learned how to crawl, then we learned how to walk, then we learned how to run. At the same time, we were learning how to speak. But it took years. Most of us who come into this world, the world of recovery, don't have the skill set yet.
No, we don't.
And for folks like you and me who have been successful and again, the scorecards, the money and the homes and the cars and status, yeah. It's really difficult for someone to admit they don't have the skill set, and it keeps a lot of people, even people who aren't that successful, it keeps them from getting the help because in a lot of cases, as you mentioned, you can stop for a period of time.
And listen, I have people who say, well, I stopped for 2 months or I stopped for a week or whatever. The fallacy is that self-will, and listen, we all know there's always an exception to every rule. We probably all know somebody, at least people in our space, we know somebody who decided to stop, did it on their own, and were successful doing it.
Right.
I would tell you, they're probably not very happy,
Well, particularly if they haven't dealt with the underlying issue.
That's the whole point, is that, alcohol and drugs are the symptom. It's not the problem. The problem is usually there's some mental illness that needs to be addressed. And what we end up doing, because we're a society that celebrates, medicating this and medicating that. I mean, look at, the big conversation in this country is whether you should take this medicine for this disease or not.
Well, everybody comes in here, they'll say, I've got anxiety. I need to get my psychiatrist to up my prescription.
It's crazy, right? It's crazy. So anyway, for everybody, business has been pretty good for us. Unfortunately, that's kind of a double-edged sword. It just means more people are finding this that need help. But that's a good thing. I will, on a personal note, and we didn't really talk about this, but last November I was diagnosed with cancer. And so,
well, actually, a year ago.
A year ago, November, right?
Yeah, 2020.
Yeah, so I have multiple myeloma, it's blood cancer, and so I'm going through that treatment, and it's been amazing. The way I have to live my life in recovery almost mirrors the way I have to live my life as somebody with cancer.
Explain that, because I think that's
one of the things that we all know is that we have to live a day at a time. 24 hours is kind of how we define our life now. One of the things for sure is that you can't look in the rearview mirror and fix anything. If you want to be reminded of it, that's fine, but you can't go back. It's not like a sci-fi movie where you can blink and all of a sudden you can go back 10 years and fix everything. It's just not the way it works.
It'd be nice.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm not liable to get stuck back there. But the other thing, and this is probably the most important thing, is that there's no way to fix the future either. Here's what you do. You live the best life you can live, and things turn out the way they turn out. Yeah. Well, that's the same. I mean, I do take a lot of medicines and everything else, but, I was in Boston over December, and, we talked about the most important thing that I can do, and it's the same thing that you can do, the same thing that people with cancer, not cancer, whatever. Good nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Those three things will really help you. It helps me as I battle this cancer, but it also, as we battle addiction, it's all about something that you can control. And so, we'll kind of keep up with that. Hopefully.
I don't want to. I mean, this is that's your story to tell. I will tell you, and I've said this to you before, and I've said it to multiple people. I don't know that I would have been as good as you have been during this whole process. Knowing what the end result is going to be, knowing how difficult this is going to be, I'm not so sure. And I would love to think I would have the fortitude to, but you have amazed me. I'm lucky that we got together. I mean, that's why I've wondered. You asked me a question. How do we come here? I'm still kind of trying to scratch my head and figure that one out. You showed up one day, I think, you called me, then you came up.
Yeah.
And then we kind of developed this thing.
Yeah. Well, and we have to make sure and give a shout out to our friend Roy Mashburn.
Yes.
Who told me about your program, and Roy knew what we were trying to do, what I was trying to do, and he said that I should talk to Lewis Finch because he's got something going on in Raleigh, and that was the phone call that I made. And it's worked out perfectly for both of us, but. You're right. This cancer is going to kill me. There's no question about that. But we all have a terminal disease called life, right? Yeah. And it's funny. I was talking to the doctor in Boston, and he said, "Well, if we do this, we do this, we do this, I might get you another 10 or 15 years." I said, "Well," he said, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 64." He said, "I get you to 74." I said, "I wasn't planning on living that long anyways."
Well, the way we were headed, we weren't going to make it anyway.
No, listen, all my friends called the bookie and bet the under on me. I mean, I wasn't supposed to get past 60, so it's kind of funny. But I do, I think I said to you yesterday, some days I even forget I even have a disease. I feel normal. I feel good. God knows it's a shame that it took a disease for me to start living a little bit better. I mean, when I got sober, I did start living differently, but the exercise and the nutrition, and I do have to, take my hat off to my wife Taylor, who lives that way anyway, and so she's been wonderful, incredibly supportive, along with my entire family. But yeah, listen, I mean, nobody likes to hear the word you got cancer, and it's so serendipitous how.
You've never would have gone in for that.
I was going in to get my, I'm a golfer. My golf my level of golf had dropped a little bit. My left knee was really bugging me a little bit. I've already had my right knee replaced, so I thought, you know what, go get my left knee replaced. So I went to see Dr. Casey, my orthopedic guy in Pinehurst, and he did an x-ray, and I asked him, I said, I said, my lower back's been bothering me some. I said, the last year I drank, I fell down my steps a bunch. A bunch. And I said, I know that I've got a small fracture in my lower spine. So I said, while we're in there doing the MRI for the knee, take a look at my back. And the radiologist, he called me 2 days later and said, you need to come in, I want to talk to you. He said, the radiologist found something in your lower back, some lesions that aren't supposed to be there. He said, we're going to have to put the knee on hold. He said, you need to go see your doctor. So I went and saw my doctor, Dr. Hip in Pinehurst, who immediately referred me to a hematology oncologist. And, it didn't take him, it took him a half a day to tell me, this is what's going on. And God knows if I hadn't gone to get my knee replaced, it would have, by the time we found out about it, it's probably been too late to do anything about it. So that's neither here nor there. But it is, listen, it's part of my journey. And I'm convinced that, through a very loving God, he got me sober because he knew this was in front of me.
So let's go down this path a little bit more, because I think it's important that let's expand upon. So if you realize you have a problem, finally, it took you going into the hospital and being on a ventilator for months, right?
Correct.
Mine was more of a legal issue, but they're still painful.
Right.
What are some of the things that you incorporate in your recovery?
Mindfulness. So every morning, I get up every morning, I do the same thing. I have that 45 minutes where I learned this in treatment. You get on your knees, but I have this incredible friend also in Pinehurst, Paul, and we walk every morning at 9 o'clock, and we talk about mindfulness, and we talk about all the things that are important. But the most important thing, if I could get it all capsuled, if I could put it all into just one topic, it would be gratitude. I'm grateful. I am now grateful. I don't have near the life I used to have. I was thinking about it coming in today. We're going to put some, and you guys will enjoy this, we're going to put a little hipper bumper music into our...
Oh, we are? We're going to bring it to the 21st century?
Well, I don't know if it's 20th century, but it is going to drop back to my drug days. It's going to either be some Dylan or some Neil Young, one of those two. But, I was thinking about riding in this morning, I was thinking about that. And so it's not like we don't take journeys back into those memories, but I am so grateful for the life I have today. It's incredibly different. I was thinking about all the things that I did, and I have a son who's out in the job market looking for a job the other day, and he met with one of my friends, and he's been around me as when I was in the thick of my life, running the radio station, high end this, high end that, and he came in and said, "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me you did all that cool stuff?" All that stuff was incredibly fun, but it was incredibly destructive.
Right.
It was incredibly destructive.
It's part of, to me, part of the disease is that, and we've discussed this at length, every time you and I drank and or did drugs, bad things did not happen.
That's right.
But the caveat to that is most of the time, in fact, damn near 100% of the time, when bad things happen, alcohol and drugs were involved.
Yeah, and one of the other things that really struck me when I was walking the other day is our egos are so out of sorts, completely run amok, and we're such assholes, selfish assholes is the best way to describe us. We don't keep up with the damage we're doing. We only think about ourselves. We don't take a view of what it must be like to be married to us, or to be the children of us, or to be the friends of us, because we're too busy making sure that we feel good about ourselves. And so, it's incredible how we just lose any kind of perspective at all.
Well, and we expect, if you brought up the trappings of success, right?
Yeah, right.
You look at that and you go, well, look what I've given you. Look at honey, wife, kids. Look what I've given you. I deserve this. This is my one retreat.
Right.
And we take it as a you're giving us permission to be assholes.
Yeah,
which is that's not the point here.
Right. Well, that's the big lie. And I think that when people become bigger drinkers is when that realization starts to creep into their reality, and they don't like it. And so more alcohol, more drugs will deaden that thought. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is it continues to get worse. Our perception of it, or at least the awareness, because that's the most important thing that we can do in life, is become aware of things.
So I asked you a question before, and I want you to go back to this. We talk about the fact that you have to treat this like you are learning to walk or talk. What specific things have you incorporated? You talk about the walking, but you do other things too, and you still do them now, 10 years after the fact you got sober, right?
Right. It's the helping people is the most important thing. I reach out to these guys every morning with this message or that message. But by the time that I start to get dressed and start thinking about my day, I've already accomplished all that stuff that I call recovery exercise. And it's reading messages. I get something from Hazelden and Betty Ford every morning.
That's where you went to treatment, right?
That's right. I went to treatment at Betty Ford in California. The second treatment, the first one was at Hope Valley in
the mountains of North Carolina.
It was classic.
Good times, right?
Well, you know what? It's one of those places. It's a little bit like Samaritan Colony down in Rockingham. There's not a lot of frills, but the amount of good they have done is unbelievable. Mr. Blevins and his wife started Hope Valley. It's in Dobson, North Carolina, right around the corner from Mount Airy, and it's amazing. And I will credit them for getting me started at AA. And it was the first 30 days of my sobriety, I was their guest.
But you have I'm sure it didn't start back then, but you have a regimen now that you keep up.
I do.
So we talk about it. We use the words awareness a lot, but I don't know that a lot of people understand what that means. The way that I interpret it, and I'm not a therapist, you are, is it's being present in the moment. Which means all that shit I've got to do after this podcast, I'm not thinking about it now, except just now when I brought up, or the stuff I should have done yesterday, or all this stuff I got to do this weekend. I've got to be here and now, because if I'm not, and the thoughts of drinking or doing drugs even pop into my head, there's a chance I might, even at this late stage, go that route.
Yeah, so I read one of the readings I had this morning was a guy who had started the rooms of AA, and he was talking about how he wanted to get that first 30-day chip. And so when he went and got the 30-day chip, he immediately felt less than because somebody was getting a 60-day chip.
Right.
And he was jealous of it.
It was a competition.
Right. Well,
yes.
That's the whole thing. And then he said later on when he got his 1-year chip, he was so proud, and then somebody was getting a 3-year chip. And so once again, he felt less than. And then later on in life, as he got 10, 15, 20 years of sobriety, he realized that the newcomer who had 1 day of sobriety was tied for first place, because that's really all we have is 1 day at a time, one moment at a time. And so I will tell you that I only have so many moments, just like everybody else. I mean, I have cancer, but everybody else has life, and that's a terminal disease as well. I mean, nobody's going to live forever. But the one thing I will tell you is that if you take it as it comes to you, and you're prepared just to accept it on its terms and to do the best you can, given the knowledge that I now have, I typically make good decisions, and I'm amazed at what life will deliver to you in the moment. If I'm thinking about something else, I'll miss it.
Right.
Yes. I'll miss it. And I don't want to, listen, I only got so many, heartbeats left. I don't want to miss anything. Yeah. And so maybe, I will tell you.
Do you think age plays into that?
I think it does. I think it does. But I will, when I'm out walking, the air tastes a little better today than it ever has, because I know that I'm not going to have it forever. Right. And so that's the way life is, I think, is that we should appreciate the moment. we deal with families in crisis every day.
All the time.
I mean, that's what we do.
Yes.
And they come to us and they're looking for the answer. And sometimes the answer we give them, which is so simple, doesn't make them feel comfortable because they want it to be more complicated. What I'm here to tell you is that recovery is not very complicated.
Right.
It's pretty simple.
Very simple.
It's pretty simple. Following the rules is pretty complicated.
You get it.
And so
We're not. Most of us are not rule followers.
we're not rule followers, but I will also tell you that the biggest thing we do for people is we educate them. And I'm not talking about the alcoholic or the addict. They're usually the last one to get it. But we usually can, their support, the number of people around them, the family, friends, whatever, we can usually educate them, and then they become a more sophisticated or intelligent support staff for the alcoholic. Right. And so I sometimes think that our biggest service is to educate the families on, listen, here's what you need to do. It's not going to be fun. You know, this may be counterintuitive, but believe me, this is what works. Mm-hmm. And, you know, how many times have we've had families walk out shaking their head, and then 3 months later they're on the phone with us saying, oh my God, can you help us again? So yeah, come on back in. But by the way, we're going to serve the same dish we served last time, which is honesty. Mm-hmm. It's not complicated. The rules are pretty simple. They're difficult to follow, but they're pretty simple to understand.
Well, it's because we all think we're somehow different in this when you're confronted with this disease. And the reality is, you may get here a little differently, but the story is pretty much the same.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know how many times a week that we face that conversation that people think that what we can do is teach them how to drink more responsibly.
Well, we talked about this yesterday, right?
We did.
So I was thinking about that this morning because that one family we were working with, everything we told them, literally everything we told them that they decided not to believe, although they trust us to go along with it, actually happened. So we look like geniuses. And you and I both know that we're far from it. We know how that person's going to act before they know they're going to act that way.
That's right.
And when it gets too uncomfortable for them, they're going to find shelter. And that's what this is about. It's about figuring out where your level of pain tolerance is, and then figuring how to control your behavior beyond that, because no one, and that includes anyone who's ever walked in this place or anyone out there who's struggling, no one's gotten help without consequences.
And you know, one of the things that's just so amazing that we know for a fact, and it was demonstrated to me again this morning before I even got out of bed when I was reading the text I got, is that you can't force this on anybody. As they say, when the student's ready, the teacher appears.
Right. Yes.
Okay? And so one of the things that we will not do is we will not chase you down to help you.
No.
But if you want to call us, and I'm talking about 24/7. I had a family reach out to me Sunday morning, and they were so apologetic about ruining my Sunday. I was like, this is what we do. We're volunteer firemen. That's really that's our mentality. But I can also tell you, we can meet with the alcoholic or we can meet with the addict, but if they're not ready to be helped, there's not much we can do for them other than wish them good luck. And we can educate the parents or the friends or the wife or the kids. This is what you can expect.
Yes.
Here's what's getting ready to happen. And we're, you know what, I'm not saying we're geniuses, but I mean, we've seen it so much because we are that addict and we are that alcoholic. And so one of the things that we always try and accomplish is that we at least bring everybody is more knowledgeable of the process they're going through. And I think that's probably the most important thing that we do. We have wonderful therapists here at Wellwyn, and they do the work of helping people figure out how to start living differently, but only after the people who show up here have to want it. You can't it's not like you can drop your kid off at school and pick them back up and they should be educated. That's not the way this works.
No.
You have to walk in here wanting help. And one of the things that Louis and I both, we always, or at least we try to, based on schedule and everything else, we always meet with anybody that wants to come in here for help to make sure that they're here for the right reason. We try and stay away from box checkers.
How much do we charge for that service?
Yeah, we don't charge anything. Yeah, we don't.
Maybe one of the reasons that business is told somebody the other day, we're a for-profit business, just not yet.
Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, Autumn, one of our new folks here, she sat in with me and she started laughing when I said, we talked about for-profit. I said, we don't exactly make great business decisions here. But so far, God willing, everything it seems to have worked out the way it's supposed to. We don't make a lot of money, but we don't lose a lot of money.
No.
And so maybe that's the way that's the way it's supposed to be. It's you know what? It makes sense to me.
Well, and the reason I asked you the question about what does your regimen look like? What do your protocols look like to stay sober? I told a group of folks last night that for the first 5 years of my recovery, I went to an AA meeting every single day, and I'll be honest with you, I am not an AA guy. I don't like going to meetings, but I applied at the time my wife was in the throes of cancer, like you. She ended up dying 3 years after I got sober. At no point did she love going over and get chemo treatments, or because she knew a day later it was going to be horrible. I mean, her hair fell out. She felt like crap, but she didn't question a thing. She just did what she was told to do because the experts said to do it. That's where I was at that point. I'd finally gotten to the point where my life was I was so miserable and things were so out of control that I would have done anything. And I went to a meeting every day, 7 days a week, no matter if I was in town or out of town. In fact, when I made my flight arrangements to go out of town on business, I would make them such that I could get to the closest AA meeting, and I would look them up online and go to the meeting first. It was the very first thing in my day timer every single day for 5 years. Now, I don't know, I'm trying to think back why I stopped doing it for 5 years. Probably was because at that point I was already in the field, and as you know, being in this business, you're around it all the time.
Yeah,
And not that you don't need it, but you sometimes you just need a break.
Yeah. You asked me, I will tell you what I've done for the last 9.5 years. The very first thing that I do when I wake up is, and listen, you're either spiritual, you're not spiritual, you believe in God, you don't believe in God, you believe in whatever you believe in. For me, it's God. And I asked him, I said, please keep me away from alcohol and drugs today. That's my first request. And then everything I do for the next, 12 hours, because we go to bed early. We just do. But is to, keep me sober. And so everything I do after I ask is based on that. That's my mission statement for that day. Stay away from alcohol and stay away from drugs.
Well, and you use the phrase, I do the next right thing.
I will promise you, and I said this to a couple of families this week. If you know what you're doing, or if you're at least aware of the playing field, if you make good decisions, you typically get good consequences. If you make bad decisions, you typically get bad consequences. And my life's no more complicated than that.
Right.
I try and make good decisions. I try and not surprise myself by doing something that I know is going to create an issue for me that I'm going to have to deal with down the road.
But it seems logical.
It does.
But you also, it would seem logical when you started at 17 or 18 doing that. But again, the threshold of pain you hadn't met yet, I don't think. Right?
Well, not that, but also I think that maybe our accounting system changes. And my happiness when I was in the throes, my 30s and 40s, my happiness was based on what I had, not what I was doing.
Yeah.
And at some point that flips. And so now my happiness is based on seeing my kids successful, seeing my wife happy, seeing my ex-wife happy, seeing everybody happy, and seeing people who are struggling, I have such empathy for them. Before, I think that the only thing I was looking for the next good time. I mean, that's really what I was always after. And when you have a bottle and a little bottle of pills, the next happy time, I controlled that. I controlled that with substances, and now I control that with lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the biggest difference. We don't ever, one of the things that most people are, I'll never forget the quizzical look of the guy we met with yesterday. He said, "What do you mean? You mean you don't charge that every year?" And I was just thinking about how the things that we do here are really designed not for us to be good, but for them to be good. I mean, we really are client focused here.
Correct.
We're not business focused. I mean, if we wanted to squeeze more money out of this machine, we could do it easily.
Well, but you recognize as a therapist that having your therapy and your the things you need to get done during the course of the day can't be administered by some third party.
Right.
Because everybody who comes in here has a little different twist on what needs to be done with them. And to allow a third party, somebody who may pay the bills, the insurance company, let's say, the ability to control that it borders on criminal if that's all you're looking to do. Mm-hmm. This is a brain disease, and most of our people are, when they first come in here, are very, very sick folks, as you and I were.
Yeah.
So getting back to that same path we talked about. So you've got a bunch of people during the coronavirus pandemic locked away at home with their loved ones, and the loved ones who aren't, we can't refer to them as persons of concern, are watching their persons of concern fall apart right in front of them in most cases.
Yeah.
And they've never experienced this before, and it's what we have heard is those folks, it's like drinking from a fire hose to get the information you want.
Yeah.
And everybody's website looks great, except ours. Ours stinks, by the way. But most everybody's website looks really, really nice. And they say all the right things. And I'm not that everybody's in this just for money, but it sends you down this path of, well, where do I choose? What's right for me? And if you allow folks like you and I to make the choice, we're always going to go down the path of least resistance. And that might not be what everybody needs. It might be tough love. It might be, again, I started mine sitting in jail in Buffalo, New York.
Yep.
You were in a hospital for several months.
Yeah, not just in the hospital, but also the amount of loss that we both experienced. It's hard to, one of the things that we all end up having to do is at some point, if you're going to get sober, you got to inventory where you are.
Right.
You just got to. And you know what? The other thing, and we don't say this enough. I know I don't say it enough. Recovery is based on 100% honesty. There's no place for anything other than complete honesty. And I'm not talking about being honest with you, or I'm talking about being honest with yourself.
Right.
Because you're the only one. Mm-hmm. I mean, the bullshit filter that you have is perfect. Mm-hmm. So you know when you're not being honest, and you know when you are. And if you can't be honest with yourself, then your recovery is always going to have some cracks in it. And I think that we experience that when we have some of our clients, some of our friends, they go through relapse. They eventually own up to what they didn't tell us the first time.
Right.
It's those dirty little secrets that you're so embarrassed, or that you think I really can't tell that person. Right. I remember in group therapy when I was in California, I remember this one guy was always quiet. He was, and we pick up on people's energy. I mean, I think now that we're sober, we pick up on a lot of things, but picking up on people's energy is pretty easy. This guy's energy was so dark, and I felt so bad for him. And one day, for whatever reason, because he heard all the rest of us spill the beans, he finally owned up to the fact that he had been sexually abused by a bunch of older guys in his neighborhood for almost 10 years and had never been able to tell anybody that. And the minute that he let that secret, which was his darkest, most private secret, you could see the relief, the tears. First off, it was an all-guy group, but the tears came out. And you know how hard it is for men to cry in front of other men, but the tears came out. And from that day forward, he was a different person. And I think that speaks volumes to what we're psychotherapists, okay? So we do talk. We try and help people through talking to them.
Right.
And we have to know what we're dealing with in order to help people. So if you're going to come in, it's not just here at Wellwind, but if you're going to seek treatment anywhere, go in prepared to just open the doors, let the floodgates, let everything come out. Don't hold anything back, because the only way you can get better is to clean. I mean, you got to let air on all your secrets. And this, some people can never quite get there. They can never quite get there.
Well, and I think those are the people who don't understand that it's not drinking and doing drugs that's the real issue.
That's right.
It's all those things that are creating in your head that what you're doing is okay. The fact that you're physically compromised. As an example, you're physically compromised for your cancer treatment because of your drinking and drug taking.
That's right.
I think since this is our first show back.
Right.
From when was the last? By the way, when was the last one we did? Do you remember?
We'll have to go back. It's probably been a year and a half. It's on
Seriously?
It's on the Recovery Boys website. All the dates are there.
Okay.
So it's. I mean.
Well, last night. I went and looked at some of the early ones. We looked really goofy, just so you know. It was sad.
Well, but the nice thing is, and I had somebody say this to me this morning, at least we're relaxed because we're not trying to impress anybody.
No.
We're certainly trying to help people, and we will. I promise everybody that's watching and listening, we won't talk about ourselves again. But we did want to refresh everybody who's new to the podcast of who we were, how we ended up here. We may not be experts on everything, but we're experts on our life.
Yes.
And how messed up we did. And we can tell you right up front, this is what we did, this is how it turned out, and these are the decisions that we've made since then that have turned out to be pretty good for us. And so we're not making it up.
No.
And now I have been to school, I've studied my disease or our disease, and I have a better understanding for it. But the long and short of it is that what this podcast is to discuss things that are going on in our space. I think over the next few years, because of this pandemic, we're going to have an ocean of people with new problems.
Very much so.
And so
this is just the beginning of this. I was watching the news the other day. They're talking about mental health issues, and I think you've got some stats here.
Well, yeah,
mental health issues and addiction issues are soaring.
Yeah, this is this came from Hazel and Betty Ford. And I was reading it because I will look at it this morning.
So this is from a SHRM study, I think, isn't it?
That's correct. That's exactly right.
SHRM is a society of HR managers. That's what it is. A society of HR managers.
Yep. This is what it says. It's a growing problem. That's what we're talking about. It's not finished growing. It's going to continue to grow. The COVID-19 pandemic began to push conversations about substance use disorders in the open as drug and alcohol use, along with deaths from overdoses, soared. Here's what happens, and we see this every day. Loneliness, confusion, and unemployment cause more people to either start using or increase their use of drugs or alcohol at a time when treatment centers and support groups were shuttered due to public health crisis. And we're going to talk about that in just one second. But nearly 1/3 of people in the United States who drink alcohol, 1/3 of people in the U.S. who drink alcohol have increased their consumption since the pandemic began. According to a May study by LifeWorks and the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, listen to this, nearly 30% who use drugs report an increase in that activity. Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control, who sometimes has a hard time, sending out a message, said deaths from overdoses rose 27% in the 12 months ending in August 2020 over the prior 12-month period. And so,
and that's only the deaths that they can directly contribute or attribute to alcohol and drugs.
right, and that's just through the first year. We all know the second year has been worse than the first year.
Right.
So those numbers will grow. And I do want to point out one thing. When this first happened, we, like every other treatment center or every other business that you had to have people in person, that was eliminated because of quarantining and this, that, and the next thing. And we went to a virtual solution here at Wellwind.
Yes.
We went to
for a
had
period of time.
For a period of time.
Yeah. Well, we had to.
It was the only way we could stay in business.
Correct.
So we had these Zoom meetings, and I got to tell you, the number of people we helped dropped dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
There was still a lot of people participating, but they weren't getting help. As one guy said in the study I just read, you can't smell somebody's breath on Zoom.
No.
And you know,
you can't tell what's in that container.
That's right.
That they're drinking while they're on the phone call. Or
Exactly
on the call
right.
with you.
Exactly right. And they can always, if they want to, they can turn the picture off and just stay on. I mean, they, instead of us controlling the environment, they control the environment. And the last thing you want to do is turn the controls of anything over to an alcoholic or a drug addict.
Well, and you and I talk about that isolation is like the perfect breeding ground for addiction.
It is.
And if you are, the only interaction you have with somebody is through a TV screen or a computer screen, and you, to your point, you can control what they see and what they hear, there's not a lot of transparency in that relationship.
That's right. That's exactly
And
right.
that's what it takes. So when we went back, and we left the virtual world and went back to live treatment, we were I think we were the very first program in the Triangle, at least, that went back full time. There's still some programs that aren't back.
Yeah.
Which I don't get it. Maybe they've been able to figure it out. I can tell you right now that it was a miserable failure from our standpoint.
It was.
I will never shut this place down again.
Yeah, we'd be better off just to not be doing business
Correct.
than to try and put something out there. And since we don't, since we've already owned up to the fact that we're not doing this for money, there's
Right.
really no other reason to do it. If you're not helping people,
No.
then there's really no reason to do it. I mean, I will tell you, AA suffered significantly with the Zoom meetings. It was not the same as
No.
being in there and seeing the guys in your home group. And so one of the things that telemedicine is here for the future. But I will tell you that it loses the personal touch. And in psychotherapy, I think that it's not a solution as much as it's just a way to continue the money coming into a business. I'm not saying that there's not some function for telemedicine in the future, because it does eliminate cost of travel. It does allow people to get help from their home. But if you have a doctor and you have a kid and you just need some information, that's one thing. If you have an addiction and you need to have a conversation about why you're drinking, that needs to happen in person.
Well, and to that point, so let's clarify any further. One-on-one is a whole lot easier to do via telemedicine than it is group.
Yep.
Group is a huge cluster. I won't go, even though we can cuss, I won't go but it's the group. That's what convinced me that I will never go back to a virtual group session ever again. I was on several AA meetings where it just turned nasty or bad, or just it was clear that people were just killing time. They weren't there for anything necessarily to do other than just kill time. And it was at least getting up out of your chair and going someplace requires you a little physical effort.
It does. Yeah? It does. But like I say, in our business, the big gun in psychotherapy is group. I mean, there's no way to replace how powerful the group is, but the group needs to be in the same place. You can't be a series of monitors. It's just not the same thing. There's no chemistry. There's no accountability. And those are the things that the most important thing we offer here is accountability. You're accountable to us.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
And so that's what typically what's missing in the life of a drug addict or an alcoholic is lack of accountability. Or unfortunately, they're accountable to their disease, not to their solution.
Well, and the last people who are going to hold them accountable are the ones who are suffering from their behaviors.
Right.
Because it's not like they're given notice. Hey, I'm gonna be acting bad. Better brace yourself. It comes on gradually, and it builds until it bursts. And we see this in group a lot, where you have people who feel jilted. That look at the effort I'm making trying to get better, and their significant other isn't buying it yet.
Right.
Because they forget how long they took them down this path.
That's right.
It's the old adage of, if you walk 10 miles into the woods, you got to come back out 10 miles.
Yeah, there's no shortcuts to sobriety. And I will tell you that for those of us that have developed some long-term sobriety, we become, and we should have another whole show, and we will definitely do that on positive addictions, because I'm going to be addicted to whatever I do.
Right.
Whatever I do, however I do it, I'm going to do it more than I should, because that's just the way I work. So I have positive addictions. I walk, I take phone calls. If we're having a family dinner and the phone rings and somebody I need to talk to, I just get up and take the phone call. So I'm addicted to helping people, and I'm addicted to a lot of good things that keep me away from the bottle and keep me away from going out on the street looking for a Percocet or for a Vicodin. Or positive addictions are a very real thing, and it's something that we probably we certainly could talk about. But these are all the things that we have learned through practical application of what works for us. And I think that's what our business is all about. Is we testify about what we went through. The reason we're believable is because we didn't make it up.
Right.
We're just
I'm just parroting everything I've heard.
Correct.
I haven't had an original idea in 50 years.
We're lucky in our business. We don't need to come up. One of the things that we don't have to do when we go home, even though I still do because I like to be entertained every so often, is we don't have to watch things on TV to come up with good storylines. We see them every day.
Absolutely.
The things that we talk about, the interesting, sad, tragic things that we deal with on a daily basis, it's real life.
Yes.
It's real life, and that's what we're in the real life business. That's really what we do. I think that we've gotten pretty good at it. I will tell you that I think that we help people. That's certainly what our mission is. It's what we try to do. And one of the things we want to accomplish with this podcast is to educate people, become a resource for them. We will, you can reach out to us on our email addresses. I will make sure that the Recovery Boys website, we need to tune it up a little bit, and I'll definitely do that. The Wellwin site is,
we can have Terry put our mobile numbers on the screen.
Absolutely. And the other thing that we'll commit to doing for you guys is we'll bring on good guests.
Yes.
Hollywood Henderson, I got to need to reach back out to him. He was a great guest. There's some local people. We'll have some sad stories. I think about Jan, my friend Jan, who lost her daughter to a heroin overdose. Unfortunately, there's a lot of those stories out there.
Very much so.
And people, it's cathartic. Jan's dedicated her life to making sure that nobody else has to go through what she went through. So, in a strange sort of way, it helps her to tell such a sad story.
Well, it's cathartic to her too.
It is, no question about it.
And hopefully her story will help another set of parents who are in denial as she was.
Yeah. I'm always amazed how the pieces get put together and how help will come out of left field, or you end up. We'll see somebody, we may not hear from them, but 2 years later, we will run into them, and they'll remind us of something that we did or something that we spoke about that made a difference in their life. And so I think that's certainly one of the reasons we do it. I will tell you, that's how Lewis has stayed sober for 14 years. That's how Macon has stayed sober for 9.5, coming up on 10 years, is being involved in this and seeing the difference that sobriety makes on people as opposed to active addiction.
Well, and with that, it looks like we're coming up on our hour.
Yeah.
And I don't want to keep anybody from what they need to do, but to Macon's point, additional shows will be coming up. We're going to be taping these every Thursday with the exception of next week. Next week's show is going to be interesting. So if you might want to put on your calendar to pull it up and watch it. We're doing it on Friday, but we're going to have the deans of several law schools in here because the law schools are now saying what we've been saying for years as well.
Right.
They've got a bunch of kids who are overachievers at the high school and college level who are now trying to do this job that's incredibly competitive, and a lot of them fall into the have mental health and drug addiction issues that are not being addressed, and you're seeing it.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things, the dream for us in our space is to not always have to be reactive, but to be in front of the problem, not always on the back end of
Correct.
it. And I said to one of the guys that I'm working with right now, I said, do me a favor. And I said, call me before you drink. Don't call me after you drink. There's still a chance before. But after, we're just going to deal with the damage. Correct. And I'm not going to tell you anything that I haven't already told you. I'm just going to remind you.
And then you make your own choice from there.
Correct.
Yeah.
And listen, I mean, we're a society, we live in the greatest country in the world. There's no question about that. We get to make our own choices. We have unlimited choices. One of the things that we want to try and do is educate our people so that you can make good choices, and we'd like to be in front of the issue, not behind the issue. Yeah. And I think that we always, one of the things that we would like for this podcast to be is a tool for people to maybe find out what's going to happen as opposed to find out what to do now that it already has happened.
And we'll set that up as we go through this. So
we will.
With that being said, I'm Lewis.
And I'm Macon, and we're
the Recovery Boys.
Listen, thanks everybody. Yes. Go to therecoveryboys.com. This show will be posted quickly. Terry, our crack team here, will make sure that it gets out. Terry's amazing. And we will see you again next week on the Recovery Boys. Lewis?
Thank you, Macon.
Thank you, Lewis.
I will see you
thank
next
you, buddy.
week.
All right. Thanks so much.
Guys. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
You've been listening to The Recovery Boys. Visit the Recovery Boys website at therecoveryboys.com. We thank you for listening to The Recovery Boys.